Welcome to the Division of Waters Floodplain Management Sections NFIP and BAFFLE training, the Indiana Floodplain Information Portal and best available floodplain layer. First, an introduction of our floodplain management section. Our section manager is Anita Nance, who's been with the division for a while. She runs the day-to-day operations of our section and is our liaison between the division director and the assistant director over our floodplain management section. Darren Pearson is the NFIP state coordinator. He is the primary liaison between FEMA and the state of Indiana. I'm Doug Wagner, as a senior water planner. My responsibilities are primarily education and outreach across the state of Indiana. I do workshops and also serve as editor for our Waterlines newsletter. The newsletter used to be a biannual publication, and we are now moving that to a quarterly publication. We also have a northern planner, Jared Evans, and a southern planner, Wanda Gaines, who's assisting me today with this recording. Their duties are they're the primary liaisons between the local communities and the states with any questions regarding floodplain management or the National Flood Insurance Program. So we'll get into our Indiana Floodplain Information Portal and best available floodplain layer, as we refer to them as NFIP and BAFFLE. First, we are going to look at the Indiana Floodplain Information Portal and show you how to file a floodplain analysis and regulatory assessment, or as we refer to it, a FARA. In this example, we have already entered an address in the Find an Address box in the upper left-hand corner of the screen and clicked on Go to Address. You'll notice that it comes up on the right side of the screen with a point of interest box, and also puts a house marker on the site in question. This is not always the case, so you need to be careful that you have the correct address. With any addressing systems, it doesn't always take you to the correct address on the first attempt. You can also scroll in by county or zoom in and out on the screen or drag the map around to find your location, and then just click on the site in question. Today we've selected this site and we're going to file a FARA. So what we do is simply click on the eFARA Wizard button at the bottom of the point of interest box on the right side of the screen. When we do that, it takes us to step one, the type of request. In this case, the owner wants to get an elevation certificate. Most likely, the lending institution has requested that they get a flood insurance policy, which is a mandatory requirement if you have a federally backed mortgage on a property. But you can use this for supporting documentation for elevation certificate or letter of map amendment or letter of map change or state or local permitting requirements. In step two is the requester information. This can be the local floodplain administrator, a surveyor or engineering firm, or the property owner themselves, simply whoever is requesting the floodplain analysis and regulatory assessment. In this case, we used the floodplain administrator as the one completing the application. Every field that has an asterisk or is highlighted in red is required to be completed. It is important to put your email in, as the division prefers to send these out electronically. In step 3, it is the property owner information. This may or may not be the same as the property location itself. If it's a rental property or a developed property, the owner's mailing address and other information will be different. So keep that in mind when you're completing the form. Again, you have information for email, to where this can be sent email if you have that property owner's email information, and can be sent electronically. Step 4 is the property location and description. This will be the physical address and the city the property is located in. It also asks for the state parcel ID number and a brief legal description or additional information or description of the property. In this particular case, we have entered Lot 1, Brookwood subdivision, since this property is part of a platted subdivision. You can also include a brief legal description, such as section, township, and range where the property is located at. Step 5 gives you an opportunity to review and submit the information. You'll want to carefully review all your requester information, property owner information, and site information on this page. You have the opportunity to go back and make any corrections if necessary. If everything is correct, you click the submit button on the center portion of the lower right hand corner of the screen. Once you click submit, that we didn't do in this particular operation because we did not want to actually file this FARA, you will have an opportunity to upload additional documentation. This may be a site plan or other details with the development in question if it is for new development. This is important, especially if you have a large amount of stream frontage or the stream is very steep. If no site plan is submitted, you'll only get an upstream and a downstream base flood elevation for your site. If you submit that site plan, they will also include the base flood elevation for the point at which the development will take place. Currently, the average time is about 60 to 90 days for floodplain analysis and regulatory assessment. Then you will receive, if you had put in your email address, you'll receive the floodplain analysis and regulatory assessment via email. This has a lot of information on it, to include mapping information, DNR Division of Water permitting and program information, and other flood insurance information. But you'll notice at the top of the first page, you'll have a file number, the date it was issued, the water body, the county, the site location or the description of the site location, and an upstream and a downstream BFE. And as stated earlier, if you have a particular site in question or it's for proposed development, if you include that site plan, it will give you a base flood elevation at the point of development. On the third page, you'll see that the copies will be provided to the property owner, the requester, and an interested party. The interested party is generally the local floodplain administrator. The FARA also has two maps attached. The first map that we see here on the right side of the screen is the flood insurance rate map, or that firm panel on which the property is located. In this particular case, there was no flood hazard area delineated on that particular firm panel. The second panel map that you receive is our best available floodplain layer. You'll notice the disclaimer at the top: this map is not to be used for flood insurance purposes. For flood insurance purposes, only the flood insurance rate maps published by FEMA are to be used. In this case, we see, because of the diagonal striping centered over the stream, that designates floodway portion on our best available floodplain layer. And there's also some fringe to the southern portion of the site. So what do we do when we have either a Zone A or absence of a FEMA map or no flood hazard area shown on a FEMA map? Here's one example that I come across while working as local floodplain administrator and director of area plan in Carroll County. I had an individual come in and apply for a permit for a new residential structure located where the icon is. As you go out and travel down this county road, the fields on both sides of the road are approximately the same elevation, and the stream is the Wabash River, which is a rather large water body with a significant amount of upstream drainage area. You have the option of the layers tab that we see in the upper center portion of the screen. In this particular case, a permit was issued for the site since it was not in the flood hazard area on the flood insurance rate map. But because of the similar elevations from one side of the county road to the other, I did file for a FARA on the property. A short time later, I received a FARA back. And if I go in and on the layers tab, as shown here, and turn on that best available floodplain layer, this is what we see. This is what I seen when I received the FARA back. Because of the diagonal striping, the entire area is delineated as floodway on our best available floodplain layer. No new residential construction is allowed under state statute or the Indiana Flood Control Act within the floodway. So I had to revoke this permit. The individual was able to find another site within the community, and all permit fees and everything were transferred to the new site. So he was able to build his home. He just had to go to a different site to do it. Another example in another nearby community is somebody wanted to build the site on the left is kind of a zoom in, build a new residential structure at this location designated by the little house icon. This is kind of a odd site because the parcel itself actually lays on two map panels. The panel on the right was printed but shows no significant flood hazard area. The panel on the left was not printed because there was no delineated flood hazard area on that panel at the time of publication. That line between the two panels lies just to the east of the county road you see at the left side of the screen. The photo on the right is a screenshot zoomed out to about 2.5 to 3 mile radius of the site. Again, we see no flood hazard area that's mapped on that panel, although there is some flood hazard area on that panel where the site is actually located. When we go to the best available floodplain layer, we see that the house is entirely in the floodway. With that, no new residential construction. If we go back to the previous page, we can kind of see it appears to be on a hill. If you go to the community's GIS system, which they do have contours on, most of the contours on that is a natural ridge line that is above base flood elevation. In this particular case, you would want to submit certified elevation data to the DNR, making them aware that the site is out by natural ground elevations and would be considered out. However, this may not be a good idea to put a house here because the driveway and other stuff would still require that permit under the Flood Control Act and would cut off those residents from any outside contact or emergency services in the event of a flood. Something else to be mindful of or to keep in mind in situations like this is that you don't want to let someone come in and construct a home or residence there where the septic system is below the flooding elevation, or construct a subgrade crawl space or subgrade basement that would be below that flooding elevation, putting them in harm's way. When these maps eventually become part of the firms, it may leave them with some significantly high flood insurance premiums if they have a federally backed mortgage. At this time, we will go out. I'm going to go out and go to a different website and actually go to the portal itself and demonstrate a couple of things on that portal. On this portal, I've already entered an address in Walkerton, Indiana, and we're going to go to that address. And I have shut off the map. I'm going to zoom out of here a little bit. It takes us to the approximate site, and you see that it's A zone. In this particular case, I don't believe that it's taken us to the correct elevation point, as we would probably want to be on the stream to the north. But if we click on the layers tab, turn this best available on, now we see the house just clips the flood fringe area. This is a local permit only, but question whether that or not the base flood elevation was taken from the correct point. In this particular case, you would want to file a FARA. You notice when we go to the site, if we scroll down on the page, you also see who the local floodplain administrator is and their contact info, and it gives you the opportunity to download a report. Keep in mind that report is not a substitute for the floodplain analysis and regulatory assessment, or that FARA, at all. This site also leaves a couple other things in question when we look at the elevation points. One of those questions is the large gap we see at the railroad grade over here between the elevation points. Typically, these elevation points are every 50 feet up the stream. So it leaves in question there. And another thing we notice is the flooding elevation at this elevation point of 727.4, and this one at 732.5, a 5-foot jump in the flooding elevation. This site is currently under further scrutiny with our engineering section to both determine what the correct BFE is for the site and take a second look at this modeling. Another option you have for the site is to go in by county, which in this case, I'm going to go to a county where I know there's going to turn off that best available again. Now we have the map centered on White County, and you see that there's not a lot or not a significant amount of flood hazard area within the community. Seeing this, you would think that there's several areas in the community that would be buildable or could be developed. When we go to that best available layer and turn it on, now we see a significant increase in the amount of floodplains that are across the county. The most significant difference you're going to see in most areas are the zone A's. You're going to see them showing a floodway and flood fringe delineation, which you do not see. But other areas such as this, you're going to see a significant increase in the amount of floodplain within the community. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Wanda, and she's going to cover our best available floodplain layer.
All right, so let me get this shared. All right, so I will be discussing our best available floodplain layer portion of the presentation, or what we refer to as BAFL. So what is our best available data? So in-house, our best available data is our recently completed floodplain mapping. In these areas where FEMA previously hasn't identified on their flood insurance rate maps, or if the FEMA has identified the floodplain, they provide a zone A that does not have any of that floodway or flood fringe that Doug was showing you earlier on MFIP. The state became very involved in wanting to study these areas and provide this delineation that FEMA originally didn't, because for regulatory purposes, it's very important to know where the floodway and where the flood fringe is. Within the floodway, the state has jurisdiction, so any sort of development that is going to occur in that area would require IDNR approval before the development can occur. If it lies within the fringe portion, then it is local jurisdiction only. The state does not need to be involved with any sort of the permitting. So it became really important for regulatory purposes to know where the floodway and where the flood fringe areas lie. So we refer to this project as our Indiana Best Available Mapping Project. So over the course of the entire state, IDNR has now provided floodways and flood fringes for approximately 19,000 miles of stream. So every 50 feet along the center of the stream lines, you see that we have provided base flood elevation points. So over the 19,000 miles, we've now provided 2.5 million elevation points. The studies have included our floodway limits, floodplains, and elevation points as well. Because we are doing a significant amount of our own mapping here within the state of Indiana, we are considered a cooperating technical partner with FEMA. Because we are considered a CTP, FEMA has what they call the CTP awards every few years to give awards for states that are doing high quality mapping within their own areas. We did receive an award from FEMA a few years ago to as a runner-up for our CTP awards grant. So part of the award was that we were allowed to work with a contractor provided by FEMA to develop a story map. So in lieu of using the story map to congratulate DNR on a job well done, we've now developed the story map in a way that actually provides a lot of really useful information to local floodplain administrators and people who may want to be more involved with floodplain management in general. We will go over that story map later on in the presentation as well. So most communities have specific language within their ordinances that allow them to regulate to the most restrictive data. Your most restrictive data in many instances is going to be your best available data, because in the state of Indiana, there's a large number of areas where there isn't any currently published FEMA map, or if FEMA did publish a map, there is no delineation of a floodway and a flood fringe. So communities have to regulate to whatever is most restrictive. There are some instances where the FEMA map may be more restrictive, and then in that case, they would regulate to that. But 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the best available data that you will regulate for. It seems to cause a lot of confusion within communities as to how to permit development in these areas now. Now that they are required to look at best available data, they're not exactly sure what the permitting process is compared to the way they've been doing it in these FEMA floodplains. But you have to permit the development exactly as they would. The reason being is that the maps and the data that DNR is providing are eventually going to become effective on a FEMA flood insurance rate map. So a residence that might be located in a best available floodplain is eventually going to be effective on a FEMA flood insurance rate map. If there's a mortgage on that structure, then later on when it's on a FEMA map, they're going to have a mandatory flood insurance requirement if that mortgage is federally backed. So you have to permit the development within the same, is because these areas are eventually going to become effective. Any files that are issued in regards to development in the floodplain, such as a building permit or an ILP, an elevation certificate, if they built an elevated structure, if it's non-residential and they chose to do dry floodproofing certificates, any sort of documentation that is issued for development within the floodplain has to be maintained permanently, so that when you're asked to provide the documentation, you have it ready at hand. In order for a community to be able to receive flood insurance from the National Flood Insurance Program, there has to be an agreement between FEMA and the local community. FEMA agrees to make flood insurance available for folks within the community who wish to purchase it. The community then agrees to adopt a floodplain ordinance and then regulate development within the floodplain in a way so that the structures are more resistant to flood damage and that they're not going to be as costly in repairs once a flood occurs. Part of that agreement is being subject to what we call a community assistance visit or a community assistance contact. Part of my duties as a Southern Water Planner is to conduct these visits. IDNR is the acting agency. We act on behalf of FEMA within the state of Indiana, so we conduct these rather than FEMA in most cases. So when I reach out to a community and we set a date for these contacts or these visits, I do ask for 5 years worth of the floodplain permits for all development that's occurred within the floodplain in the last 5 years. I look over these documents, and if something's missing, maybe you didn't get the elevation certificate or something like that, I will ask you to go back and provide that document. So it's always important to make sure that you're getting the document in a timely fashion after the development is completed, rather than 4 to 5 years down the road. We will make you go back and get that documentation. So it's always important to have that, and it's ready to be provided if necessary. The biggest question we get from floodplain administrators now is, when am I supposed to use what? I have the best available floodplain layer, and I now have I used to use the flood insurance rate maps. When do I use what? For flood insurance purposes, you're legally only allowed to use a flood insurance rate map. The reason being is that the way that the best available floodplain layer currently sits, it doesn't meet the full requirements of a detailed study per FEMA's requirements. So because of that, if you have a mortgage lender or an insurance agent reach out to you and they ask you for some sort of documentation on what zone a structure sits within, you have to use the flood insurance rate maps. We always want to encourage people within a best available floodplain that may not be on a FEMA flood insurance rate map to obtain some sort of flood insurance. Just because they're not on a FEMA map, you know that flood risk is still there because IDNR studies have shown that this area may be prone to flooding in the case of a 1% flood. FEMA does offer a preferred risk policy, which is a low premium flood insurance policy for areas that are not included in a mapped floodplain on a flood insurance rate map. So people that are located within a best available floodplain have the benefit of being able to purchase lower flood insurance premiums because they're not on a FEMA flood map yet. For regulatory purposes, your ordinances require you to use your most restrictive map. In most cases, this is going to be, again, your best available data. There are some instances where FEMA provides a really large Zone A floodplain that doesn't have any floodway or flood fringe. IDNR has come in and done a study for an area, and we've actually shown that the floodplain isn't actually as wide as what FEMA originally thought it would be. In these areas where it may be on a flood insurance rate map, but best available shows it may be out, we want to encourage LOMAs, or a letter of map amendment. This is a letter from FEMA that specifically removes the property, a portion of the property, or just a structure from the flood insurance rate map floodplain. The reason that you want to encourage these LOMAs is because although best available data shows that it's out, we aren't able to relieve the mandatory flood insurance requirement coverage because that the best available floodplain layer doesn't meet the full requirements, again, of that detailed study. So you have to get a letter from FEMA, which would be the letter of map amendment, and you have to get that in order to be relieved of the mandatory flood insurance requirement. So what do you do when you have a homeowner that just doesn't want to believe the best available data? You have a couple of different discussion points you can do with them. You could talk about your ordinance requirements. You know, you can explain that your community has chosen to adopt floodplain regulations, and these floodplain regulations require you to regulate to whatever data is most restrictive. You know, these regulations were voluntarily adopted by your community so that you could provide flood insurance to everyone within the community that wishes to purchase it. You can talk about the community consequences if your community doesn't want to regulate to its own floodplain ordinance. In many instances, if a community chooses not to regulate, they can possibly be put on probation or suspended from the National Flood Insurance Program. If that happens, any sort of structure that has a mortgage on it and has flood insurance as part of that mortgage, when the flood insurance is no longer available, those mortgages get called forward, and it can cause a lot of homeowners to actually end up defaulting on their homes, or foreclosing on their homes because of it. So if you try to give a discussion to this property owner and there's not wanting to listen, feel free to send them to us at the Division of Water. We would be more than happy to try to explain this to them. You can send it to water_inquiry@dnr.in.gov. So does the community have different types of data? You know, a lot of these areas, the local officials are very familiar with the different kinds of topography that you have within these floodplains. So maybe there is some disagreement about what the best available data looks like, and you know, they may not think that it actually reflects the correct floodplain. So they provide us different types of data. They can provide us surveyed cross sections. Maybe there was a bridge or a culvert that hadn't been taken into account when IDNR was doing their studies. If this is the case, and you have an outside engineering firm that maybe has completed a study for you, they can feel free, again, to reach out to water_inquiry@dnr.in.gov. We will forward it to our engineering staff, and they will actually be in contact with you regarding the results of your study that you've done. We do have guidelines for the way we develop not only the best available data, but FEMA's flood insurance rate maps as well. FEMA makes their guidelines available, and the guidance for flood risk analysis and mapping is available as a PDF, and IDNR makes their guidelines available in the general guidelines for the hydraulic assessment of floodplains in Indiana. So if you need a copy of either one of these guidelines, again, reach out to water_inquiry@dnr.in.gov, and we will get you copies of these guidelines. So when we have communities that disagree with the best available data that we provided within their community, they have different deliverables that they have to provide us in order to sort of combat what we were thinking about for their best available data. So we ask for 5 digital photos at each bridge, 2 digital photos at each cross section. And the photos that you take have to follow the convention and specifications and FEMA guidelines 6.1. We do also ask for sketches as well. We ask for the sketches of each bridge and each cross section. And then it has to follow, again, the specifications and FEMA guidelines 6.2. We do ask for survey data. The survey data has to be delivered as a comma delimited text file, has to include all the fields noted in Table 1 of FEMA Guidelines 6.3. They have to label all the points using the survey code and shown in Table 3 of FEMA Guidelines Section 6.3. All horizontal coordinates will be collected and submitted in the appropriate state plane coordinate system. It has to be in feet referenced to NAD 83. And the vertical data has to be referenced to NAVD 88 in feet. All the data that's going to be provided in the survey report has to follow the survey data naming conventions listed in FEMA Guidelines 6.6 and 6.7. And the supervising professional land surveyor has to submit a surveyor's report at the end of the project, defining the dates of the surveys, the equipment and techniques that they had used to set the controls and then obtain and collect the data. And it has to be certified, ensuring that the surveyor was competent and that the data that they had collected was accurate as well. So the next website we're going to take a look at is what we refer to as, what is called the Divisional Water Online Research Center, or what we refer to as DWORK. DWORK is a really useful site that we use in-house to check properties for certain IDNR documents. So if a property has submitted an EFARA, so the floodplain analysis and regulatory assessments that Doug had shown you earlier, if they have obtained a IDNR construction and a floodway permit, if there was previously a violation, a floodway violation identified on this property as well, this would be the site to check all of it. It's a very easy way to check and see what kind of records we have for each property. So the main way that you'll access this site is you go to our homepage, which is idnr.gov/DNR/water. So once you go there, in the lower left-hand portion under floodplains and permits, there is the second link that says Divisional Water Online Research Center. Once you click on that, it'll open this next page that gives you a brief description about the Online Research Center. To be able to open it, you click on the image below and to open the web app. So let me switch over so we can take a look at it. All right. A second. Share. Oops. Okay. So when you first click on the web app, it will open up and give you a disclaimer. Once you click OK, it'll take you to this overlay. You can primarily, when you're looking at the Divisional Waters Online Research Center, you have a certain property in mind that you're wanting to get a better idea of what kind of records are within DNR's database for this particular property. So you can search by address. I have an address typed up here already, and then you can click the magnifying glass and it'll take you to the site. So once it takes you to the site, it'll pop up a little icon box that tells you the address that you just typed in. So to be able to access most of what you can do with Do Work, in the upper right hand corner there is a layer list icon that looks like a sandwich. If you click on that, it will take you to all the different databases that we have within the research center. So earlier I talked about if you were wanting to look for, those FARAs, those permits, any violations. In order to be able to access any of those different records, you would click on the first icon that says ATS, FTS, CTS, VTS. So these are all the different records we have. Once you click on that, it will start to populate these different icons across the map. So all of your green triangles are where they have requested an EFARA, so the floodplain analysis and regulatory assessment. This could have been because they were wishing to put in some sort of development, and maybe they needed to get an elevation for it. If they're requesting flood insurance, they would need to get a base flood elevation. Maybe they were doing an elevation certificate, and the surveyor, again, needed to get a base flood elevation point. So those are all different reasons as to why they would reach out to get a FARA. Your blue icons are your construction and a floodway permits. So somebody had wanted to do a development within the floodway, and they've come to DNR to get a permit for said development. And your red icons are where you've previously had violations within that floodway violations within the area before. Maybe somebody did a development without getting a permit. Maybe they received a permit but didn't follow exactly what they were going to do on the original application for the permit. So what they actually completed was very different than what they were permitted to do originally. So there could be a multitude of reasons as to why there is an open violation, or there was a violation on that property. When you click on each of these icons, it does generally generate a pop-up box. It gives you the folder name for the document. So for this FARA, it is GN 29090. Tells you the water body that's affected, which is currently Moots Creek. It also does give you a project type. This one does not, but the project type will often give you an indication as to why they had requested the base flood elevation through the EFARA process. Again, sometimes it'll say building a residence, flood insurance. Oftentimes it will just say general request, but it can give you an idea as to why they're requesting the base flood elevation. You can also do the same thing for the permits. So for this permit, it does again give you the file number, which is FW22279. Again, tells you the water body that's affected. And this one tells you the reason why they obtained a permit, which was for a bridge replacement. Again, you can also do the same thing with the violations as well. File number 5998. Again, water body is Moots Creek. And for this violation, somebody had put in an illegal fence within the floodway. So it wasn't permitted from DNR prior to them putting it up. So one of the other really useful things that you can do with Do Work is you can also overlay the currently effective FEMA flood insurance rate maps. If you scroll down the layer list and you click the published flood hazard layer, it will overlay what FEMA currently looks at when determining whether or not a structure needs to carry flood insurance. So as you can see, this area is Zone A. There is no cross-hatching, there's no striping, so there's no floodway and no flood fringe in this area. This is an area where IDNR would do a study for the best available data. So once you have that turned on, you can also overlay the best available layer as well. And you can see now that IDNR has done our best available studies. We've provided the cross-hatching. So we provided the striping of the floodway and the outlying area, which is the flood fringe. Again, remember that anything within the stripe portion of the floodplain requires an IDNR construction and a floodway permit prior to a local permit being issued. Anything in the solid outlying purple areas is going to be considered fringe, and that would be local jurisdiction only. Now, IDNR only provides best available data in areas where we have jurisdiction. So we have jurisdiction everywhere in every floodway that has an upstream drainage area of greater than 1 square mile. There are some portions of the floodplain where our best available data may actually just kind of stop. So in some sections towards the tail end of a stream, our best available data kind of just cuts off at some points. So in order to check if your stream would be an area where we would provide best available data, we do have a stream drainage area overlay as well. Once you click on that, it overlays these different thicknesses of blue lines across the creeks and streams. Anything in blue is going to have an upstream drainage area of 1 square mile. So if it's in blue, we will provide a base flood elevation as well as a floodway and flood fringe for it through our EFAIR process. There are some portions of the state where, again, we haven't completed the best available data studies yet. So if that's the case and you find a stream that's greater than 1 square mile drainage area, but hasn't been studied by our best available data yet, you can request it through the EFAIR process and we will provide that free of charge to you. If it's less than 1 square mile, it's not going to show up on here. So if it's less than 1 square mile drainage area, we will not provide a base flood elevation for it. We also can overlay our base flood elevation data as well. So each time you go to click on a point, it'll do it. It's not doing it. But each point that you click on will give you actually the base flood elevation for each point. We do also have the overlays of elevation contours as well that you can overlay. We do also have different years of aerial imagery, the newest one being the 2011 and 2013. You can switch back to the 2005 as well as the 1998 aerial imagery. We do use this in-house to get an idea of possibly when a structure was constructed within an area and determining whether or not that structure might have been subject to floodplain regulations depending on the particular community and when they chose to join the program in the National Flood Insurance Program. So this is a good way to check in-house to see when a structure was built. We do also use this in-house to get an idea of what the current ground elevations are for a particular site. So anywhere you click, a pop-out box is going to be generated. As you can see, this is page 1 of 2. The boxes generally populate pages of between 1 and 4. You can navigate these pages with the little arrow that says next feature. Once you click on that, the last page of these pop-up boxes will give you the rough elevation of the ground where you clicked. So in this case, it's 688.35 plus or minus 2 feet. So it does have a margin of error there as well. But this is really useful in getting an idea of the ground elevations and seeing how they compare to the base flood elevations. As most people that work within floodplain management know, you get lots of calls from homeowners that are wishing to get out of their flood insurance requirement. They don't want to have to carry it anymore because they have a mortgage. So this is an easy way to determine whether or not it may be worth an investment for them to hire a surveyor to come out and shoot some ground elevations. This gives you a chance to look at the ground and compare that to the base flood elevation. In order to be removed from the floodplain, FEMA has to see that the ground elevations are at or above the base flood elevation. So if they're relatively close to, if the base flood elevation is relatively close to the ground elevations, probably within 2 feet or so, it may be worth them actually hiring a surveyor to come out. Obviously, if there's about an 8-foot difference and the ground elevations sit 8 feet below base flood elevation, it's not worth their time to have a surveyor come out because they're not going to be able to get removed via the LOMA process. So this is a really useful website to be able to do a quick check to see how those compare. So that is primarily it for due work. So I will give this back over to Doug so he can show you the story map.
All right, as Mona mentioned, we were through our Cooperating Technical Partners program, we decided to use this story map. It was actually started out as an award, but we wanted to use it to educate our public and local floodplain administrators with to help communicate flood risk. You'll notice the story map has several tabs across the top. We're going to go through most of those tabs. The introduction I'm going to go through in a little bit more detail, just kind of to explain that. And when you get to the main page here on this introduction, you just simply scroll down or use the drag bar to the right. It explains a little bit about it and lets you know that DNR has long been leading the charge with tackling diverse responsibilities around protecting Indiana's most vital natural resource and overseeing development near Indiana's waterways. So why the Department of Natural Resources? Well, after severe and costly statewide flooding along the Ohio River, most notably in 1913 and again in 1937, the Indiana Flood Control Act was passed in 1945 to minimize future flood losses for Indiana citizens. The Indiana Flood Control and Water Resources Commission was then established. The commission was mandated and charged with overseeing development in and around the state's water resources. With that responsibility, the commission has been issuing permits for floodplain activity since the early 1950s. This was over 20 years prior to the inception of the National Flood Insurance Program. So we've been around and working on this for a while. Later in 1965, the commission merged with the Indiana Department of Conservation to become the Department of Natural Resources. Divisions were formed within DNR to address specialized natural resource concerns. Water resource programs were assigned to the Division of Water, reflecting the concern for the resource evaluation and conservation and public safety in these flood-prone areas. The statutory authority that develops comes first from the Code of Federal Regulations. And that's where FEMA is authorized to establish these flood insurance rate maps that we see on the screen in front of us here. One being a Zone AE, which is a detailed study that shows the diagonally striped area or that floodway area, and the one on the right showing a Zone A. In those Zone A's, the Indiana Flood Control Act gives DNR the authority to establish those base flood elevations, which is also provided for in that Code of Federal Regulations in 44 CFR section 60.1D that lets states and local communities that have more restrictive regulations take precedent over the federal minimum standards. Indiana does this through the Flood Control Act, which is IC 14-28-1, and Indiana Administrative Code 312 IAC 10, or the General Floodplain Rules for the state of Indiana. Indiana does have some higher standards. The most notable is that the lowest floor on any new construction or substantially improved structure has to be at least 2 feet above the base flood elevation, or 2 feet above that regulatory flooding elevation. The 1% annual chance, or however that is referred to in your local community. We define the flood hazard area as the entire area, but has also that regulatory floodway, which is most generally centered on the stream, but not always exactly centered on that stream, with the flood fringe areas where those flood waters flow at a slower rate and don't have near the velocity or damaging characteristics. By the federal standards, you're allowed to fill that fringe to create up to a 1-foot surcharge. In Indiana, that surcharge within that floodway, cannot exceed 0.15 feet. And a reminder that DNR must approve any construction activities in any floodway prior to the beginning of that construction. So if that development is for a new structure and there's associated grading or filling work that's going to be done, none of that work can take place until that permit is issued. That work must also be shown on the scope of work that's submitted with that permit application. And most generally, no new residences are allowed in the floodway within the state of Indiana, as we spoke of earlier. And then reminder also that the DNR Division of Water must approve all BFE and floodway delineations that are used for floodplain management purposes, as long as the upstream drainage area of the site is greater than 1 square mile. And we do, as Wanda stated earlier, we do designate a floodway for any stream that drains an area greater than 1 square mile. And we'll provide floodway analysis and delineation on that. One of the publications, it's many of the diagrams and stuff that you've seen so far come directly from our quick guide that we published in 2018. That is also available on our Division of Water website under publications. So a little bit about this Zone A project. This map shows all the areas that were covered under the project and what streams have been mapped within the state. The gray lines are areas that haven't been studied, which there are very few of those. And some of those areas that are shown on this map in gray are now currently under study. But the red lines were the existing National Flood Hazard Layer areas that were delineated as Zone AE with those floodways designated. The green lines, which is the bulk of this Zone A project that was undertaken, were studies that were funded by OCRA, or the Office of Community and Rural Affairs. And last, another small portion, the magenta or purple lines, were the DNR Zone A studies that were funded directly by FEMA. All in all, with completion of this study, the state of Indiana now has almost 23,000 miles of stream that have been mapped within the state. And these are all model-backed studies to where there was actually a H&H study done on it, or that hydraulic analysis was done on these. And you can get more information. We'll look at that at floodmaps.in.gov. We'll look at that a little bit later. This also highlights the project team, who also earned awards for Excellence in GIS Award from the Indiana Geographic Information Council and Outstanding Floodplain Project from Indiana Association of Floodplain and Stormwater Management. So the best available data, it is in the portal, and When you go to the floodplain information portal that we looked at earlier in late February or early March of 2019, that portal was defaulted to the best available layer. So that's what you'll look at when you originally go to that portal. And you can kind of see it here on this screen as that best available will come up. You'll see the floodway delineation on the lower portion of the map, and then where Zone AE studies were already completed, it basically just copies that. There was no changes made to those areas. Talks a little bit about the portal, local requirements under your floodplain ordinance, and more maps. There's quotes in here. Talks about the fluvial erosion hazards in Indiana, which is streams that like to move around. We have a few streams in Indiana that will move several feet horizontally in any given year. And that's what the fluvial erosion hazard is. And then it talks about famous CTP program and gives some of the highlights from the 2018 year, which is when this was actually done. Next is the hydrology of Indiana, which I'm going to just do a quick search here to zoom into a site. So with the hydrology, you see the blue lines that Wanda talked about on our do work, designates this tributary to Moots Creek as having upstream drainage area greater than a square mile. You'll see it drops off just north of the site. It drops off to where it's less than 1 square mile. This is when we go to our best available layer. We see that that was not actually mapped as part of this project. That's one of the few streams. There are a few of them out there, like Wanda talked about earlier, that they were not mapped with that floodway and fringe area on that 1 square mile drainage area. Most of this is being taken off of the larger stream. But the nice thing about these 3 tabs, remember we're on our hydrology page. We went to the best available. It keeps you on the same page when you're working within the story map, and you can even go and look at the national flood hazard layer. When you do that, you see that it's mapped as Zone A. It gives you the map and map panel number and the effective date of that map. You can use the portal as well. It's not real user friendly on this, depending on whether you're using a desktop or laptop. You don't have the search capabilities. You'll just have to zoom into it. But typically with any website, when you work through multiple websites, you do notice a slowing. And the final tab is the floodplain data downloads tab. Takes you to the Indiana best available floodplain mapping. If you scroll down, first option is to subscribe to be notified when updated files are available. If you click on this link, you'll simply put in your email address, and then once a month, you'll get an email from the division and notifying you which communities have been updated. And once you receive that, if your community has been updated, you will then go to this same page. You will come down to the map below. You'll select your county, whatever it may be. Once you click on your county, it will automatically begin to download those shape files so you can have them put on your local GIS system. The other option is under data sources. If you go to the ArcGIS REST services, This is an option for those GIS providers, although we do have one or two that's not compatible with this REST service. This allows you to update your community's flood maps in real time with this best available floodplain layer. When subscribing to this service, the GIS providers, if they're subscribed to this service, this will be a real-time update, so you won't have to worry about going in, downloading, and transferring those files. It will do that automatically as the files are updated. And that is it for the story map. And quit sharing that. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint and finish up with a couple of additional resources and website information for you. The first is the Indiana Association of Floodplain and Stormwater Management. Their annual conference this year, September 16th through the 18th. This is going to be a virtual event, but there's a lot of good sessions there, and they've reduced what their normal conference rate is. Would be a great opportunity with many things moving to the virtual platform for folks to get in at a reduced rate and take part in that conference. Several instructional sessions will be held on both floodplain and stormwater management. Next is the Association of State Floodplain Managers at floods.org. They do have, their website has been updated, but they do administer the Certified Floodplain Manager program and keep track of your continuing ed hours that are required for that certification. They also have several resources such as flood maps, white papers, and other resources out there available. Some of those resources are available to the general public, and some of them are for members only. And if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to contact us. Wanted to mention the water_inquiry email with the DNR. The other option is any of us in the floodplain management section or your respective planner can help you out with that, and would like to thank you for your participation in and taking the time to view this recording. Thank you.